I don't normally do book reviews, and definitely I don't make videos to encourage people to read those reviews. But this book deserves an exception. And the reason that it deserves an exception is that it contains something very, very important, particularly for two groups of people. One, some of the police officers who think that community safety and well-being has little to do with real policing, right? It's a nice to have, or it's a way to justify police budgets. And secondly, some of the community members and some of the social service providers, they believe that police doesn't have any role in the community safety and well-being. Police only is there for incident response and law enforcement. So in this book, there's something very interesting for both of these groups. To further highlight the importance, let me add that it took me 11 months to review this book. Not that it's a difficult read, but because it's a narrative, it's a story told by several police officers who worked with NYPD at that time. However, I wasn't interested in simply summarizing what happened in New York City at that time. I wanted to understand why it happened, what actually drove one of the most significant community safety transformations in modern urban history, and what lessons can we learn from the New York's experience to apply today. So when I was working through this book, and you can see when I was working through this book page by page, three things stood out for me. Number one, the New York's transformation was not driven by policing alone. It was driven by shared responsibility, prevention, accountability, community partnership, early intervention, and most importantly, system-wide alignment, right? So that's one. Number two, which is very important, is that none of this could have happened without police leadership. Police helped initiate, convene, support, and implement many of those partnerships that made that transformation possible. And number three, many of the same principles and strategies of the CSWB that we associate with CSWB today, they were applied in practice without even calling it CSWB. So much of the CSWB philosophy was already there, and that's exactly what I wanted to explore in the review of this book, right? So, and if you care about policing, community policing, public safety, community safety, or the future of CSWB, I think that you will find these lessons worth considering. And now consider New York City in 1990s, right? So the annual murder rate was 2,245, which is about 6 murders per day, right? And then there was crack epidemic, there was rising social disorder, public confidence was collapsing. So it was a city under pressure, abandoned neighborhoods, a police service under enormous strain. Most people believed that New York City could not recover. But then the trajectory changed. Fast forward to 2024, the average annual murder rate has dropped to 377 per year, right? Which is an 87% reduction in crime. It's a long-term transformation, not a short-term spike. So this is one of the largest urban crime decline in modern history. So the question is that what actually happened? So the answer to that is documented in this book. Peter Moskos documented what happened through the voices of the police officers who lived it. And when you study that transformation carefully, one thing becomes very, very clear, and that is that what New York built is remarkably similar to the CSWB approach. They didn't use the terminology. They didn't call it the community safety and well-being approach. They didn't use the language, but they applied the philosophy. What changed was not one tactic. It was the alignment of the entire system around public safety. It included police, prosecutors, probation, payroll, social services, community organizations, businesses, and residents. All of them aligned themselves, and prevention became operational. And all those key players stopped operating separately. Safety became a collective responsibility. And this is what CSWB looks like in practice. The focus was not only on reacting to crime, it was proactive policing. It was outreach before crisis. It was youth engagement. It was violence prevention. It was community-based interventions and addressing risks before escalation, right? So from that perspective, intervention became broader. So violence reduction, for example, was the objective, right? But the focus was on reducing conditions leading to violence. It was on reducing disorder, improving quality of life issues, improving transit and safety in public spaces, ensuring a coordinated multi-agency response, enforcement along prevention. So in this process or in this movement for community safety, community became a part of the safety strategy. Residents helped proclaim public spaces, businesses, improvement districts, they supported the recovery, shared ownership of the neighborhood safety took place, and then public confidence gradually returned. Public was not treated as spectators. They became active partners in restoring safety and restoring confidence in police. That leads us to another key factor which played a role, that was data and accountability, right? So data changed decision making, right? They had an initiative that was called ComState that transformed decision making for the leadership. It was real-time crime analysis available to the leadership and those working on front lines. There were clear accountability measures and outcomes, and the frontline commanders were helped with rapid operational adjustments based on those information. So strategies were adopted quickly and performance was measured accordingly, right? So this means that leadership and culture played a key role. It means that strategic clarity was provided from the top. Our local commanders, they had operational ownership. There were shared missions across the system. There was cultural shift, and that cultural shift was not just within the police, but also outside the police across the system. And there were long-term institutional changes, which means that the culture shift was not limited to NYPD alone. It was across the system, and it was critical. It was critical because structural change alone only lasts when people believe in it. And that particular model survived all these years despite leadership change because of that cultural change. So crime continued falling even after the senior leadership change, because that was way back in 1990s, right? And the reason is simple. The approach had become embedded across the institutions, practices, and expectations, right? So this was not a temporary flavor of the day initiative. It became part of how the city as a whole operated. So the bottom line is that the lessons are real, right? New York made community safety a shared civic priority, and they didn't do it through a single program or activity. They did it through coordinated action, shared responsibility, prevention, accountability, and community participation. So now we can ask ourselves, was our city or your city ever as bad as the New York City in 1990s? And the answer for most of us is of course no. So if it worked there, it will work anywhere. So this means that the argument that we don't need police for the CSWB work, or CSWB work is not policing, or the police role is limited to incident response alone, those arguments become much harder to defend, right? To the contrary, the evidence exists, right? And for those who still have doubts about the role of the police and the value of collaboration, this is a very good read, and I've given all the factors, I've highlighted all the factors which show that the CSWB principles were followed exactly in New York City, which made this initiative a success as lessons for us. And this is what CSWB looks like when it becomes operational. Thank you.